Dr. Emily Carter had always believed that medicine was more than just a profession. It was a calling. At 38, she had spent over a decade saving lives, stitching wounds, and comforting patients at St. Vincent's Hospital. Her days were long, her nights sleepless, but she never complained. For Emily, every life saved was worth the exhaustion. But being dedicated came at a cost. Between student loans, mounting bills, and the emotional toll of constantly putting others first, Emily often felt like she was running on empty. Still, she refused to give up. She clung to one dream, a dream of opening a free clinic in an underserved neighborhood where healthcare was scarce and hope even scarcer. It was a vision she carried close to her heart, though financial struggles kept it perpetually out of reach. On this particular night, after finishing a grueling 12-hour shift, Emily was finally heading home. The hospital corridors had been eerily quiet as she changed out of her scrubs, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her tired face. All she wanted was a hot shower, a cup of tea, and maybe, if she was lucky, a few uninterrupted hours of rest. As she drove through the dimly lit streets, rain began to patter against her windshield. The rhythmic sound almost lulled her into a trance, but then something caught her eye. A dark figure sprawled awkwardly near the curb ahead. At first glance, it looked like debris blown by the storm, but as she slowed down, her stomach clenched. It wasn't debris. It was a person. Emily pulled over sharply, grabbing her medical bag from the passenger seat before rushing toward the motionless body. As she knelt beside him, she realized he was young, barely older than a teenager and barely breathing. His skin was pale, his lips tinged blue, and blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. "Hey, can you hear me?" Emily called out urgently, checking for a pulse. It was weak but present. "Stay with me." With no time to waste, Emily stabilized him as best she could using items from her car and called for an ambulance. By the time paramedics arrived, she insisted on riding along to the hospital. Something about this boy, his fragility, his fight, stirred something deep within her. She couldn't explain it, but she knew she couldn't leave him now. At the ER, tests revealed internal injuries caused by a severe car accident. Without immediate surgery, he wouldn't survive. Though exhausted, Emily volunteered to perform the operation herself. Hours later, as dawn broke outside the operating room windows, she emerged victorious, but drained. The boy, whose name they learned was Daniel Harper, had survived. What Emily didn't realize at the time was that this act of duty would ripple far beyond that single night. Little did she know, the life she saved would someday save hers in return. The years that followed Daniel Harper's miraculous recovery were a blur of long shifts, sleepless nights, and endless sacrifices for Dr. Emily Carter. Saving lives was her calling, but it came at a steep price, one she paid willingly, though not without consequence. Emily had always dreamed of opening a free clinic in an underserved neighborhood. Growing up, she'd witnessed firsthand how lack of access to healthcare could devastate families. Her own mother had delayed treatment for a chronic condition because they couldn't afford the bills, leading to complications that might have been avoided with early intervention. That experience shaped Emily's resolve to make quality care accessible to everyone, regardless of their financial situation. But as the years passed, her dream felt more like a distant mirage than an achievable goal. Her days began before sunrise and often ended well after midnight. At St. Vincent's Hospital, she juggled surgeries, consultations, and administrative duties, rarely taking time for herself. Colleagues admired her dedication, but few understood the weight she carried. Student loan debt loomed over her like a storm cloud, compounded by mounting bills from her modest apartment and car payments. Every paycheck seemed to disappear as quickly as it arrived, leaving little room for savings or hope of funding her clinic anytime soon. Despite these challenges, Emily refused to give up. On weekends, she volunteered at community health fairs, offering free screenings and advice to those who couldn't afford regular checkups. She spent countless hours writing grant applications, only to receive rejection letters that chipped away at her optimism. Still, she pressed on, clinging to the belief that persistence would eventually pay off. But the emotional toll was harder to ignore. Friends invited her to dinners and gatherings, but she always declined, claiming she was too busy. The truth was, she didn't know how to explain her exhaustion, or the guilt she felt whenever she considered prioritizing her own needs over her patients. Her social circle dwindled until it consisted mostly of colleagues who understood the demands of the medical field. Even then, relationships remained surface level. No one truly knew the depth of her struggles. There were moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, lying awake in her cramped bedroom, Emily wondered if her efforts were futile. Was she fighting a losing battle? Could one person really make a difference in a system so broken? Yet each morning, she rose with renewed determination, reminding herself why she'd chosen this path in the first place. One particularly grueling week encapsulated the highs and lows of her journey. A young girl with asthma came into the ER gasping for air. Emily stabilized her just in time, earning grateful tears from the child's mother. Later that same day, however, she received another rejection letter for a grant she'd poured weeks of effort into. The contrast between saving a life and failing to secure funding for her clinic left her emotionally drained. That evening, as she drove home through city streets bathed in neon lights, Emily allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. She pulled over near a park and sat in silence, staring out at the darkened playground. Memories of Daniel Harper flickered in her mind. The frantic hours in the operating room, the relief when he pulled through. She hadn't thought much about him since that night. Doctors weren't supposed to get attached. But now, reflecting on her own struggles, she wondered what had become of him. Had he recovered fully? Did he remember her? Did he realize how much his survival had meant to her, not just professionally but personally? Unbeknownst to Emily, Daniel had indeed remembered. His brush with death had changed him in profound ways. Once consumed by ambition and profit, he now dedicated his energy to philanthropy, focusing on initiatives that improved healthcare access. He often thought about the doctor who had saved his life, wondering if there was some way to repay her kindness. Little did either of them know, fate was already weaving threads that would bring their paths together again, and transform both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Years had passed since that fateful night in the ER, and Emily Carter had almost forgotten about the young man whose life she'd saved. Her days were consumed with work, grant applications, and the relentless pursuit of her dream, a free clinic for underserved communities. She rarely allowed herself to reflect on individual cases. There simply wasn't time. But fate has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It happened on a chilly autumn evening at a charity gala hosted by one of the city's most prominent philanthropists. Emily hadn't wanted to attend. She preferred staying home with a good book or catching up on sleep. But her colleague, Dr. Patel, had insisted. "You never know who you might meet," he'd said with a wink. "Networking is half the battle." Reluctantly, Emily dressed in her least-worn blazer and headed to the event. The venue was opulent, filled with glittering chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and guests clad in designer suits and gowns. Emily felt out of place among the polished crowd, clutching her glass of sparkling water like a lifeline. She wandered through the room, avoiding small talk as much as possible, until she found herself standing near the stage during the keynote speech. The speaker was a young entrepreneur named Daniel Harper. His name didn't ring a bell at first, but something about his voice pulled at the edges of her memory. He spoke passionately about resilience, gratitude, and the importance of second chances. "I wouldn't be here today if not for one person," he said, his eyes scanning the audience. "A doctor who stayed late on a cold night to save my life. I owe her everything." Emily froze, her heart pounding as realization dawned. That was her patient, the boy from the car accident. She stared at him, taking in his confident demeanor and the genuine emotion in his words. It was hard to reconcile this successful man with the fragile figure she'd once fought so desperately to save. When the speech ended, Emily slipped away, intending to leave unnoticed. But before she could reach the exit, a voice called out behind her. "Dr. Carter?" She turned to see Daniel approaching, his face alight with recognition. Up close, she could see faint scars along his jawline, remnants of the injuries she'd treated all those years ago. He extended a hand, which she shook hesitantly. "Daniel Harper," he introduced himself. "I don't think I ever got the chance to properly thank you." "It's part of the job," Emily replied automatically, brushing off his gratitude as she always did. "How are you doing?" "I'm great, thanks to you," he said warmly. "And yourself?" "Still saving lives." "Trying to," she admitted with a wry smile. "Though these days, it feels more like I'm fighting paperwork than anything else." They moved to a quieter corner of the room, where Daniel learned about Emily's struggles. She told him about her dream of opening a free clinic, the rejections she'd faced, and the uphill battle of balancing idealism with reality. To her surprise, Daniel listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and nodding along as though every word mattered. "You've already done so much," he said finally, his tone earnest. "But let me help. Let me fund your clinic." Emily blinked, certain she'd misheard him. "What?" "It's the least I can do," Daniel pressed. "You saved my life. Now let me help you save others." For a moment, she was too stunned to respond. Funding had been the single biggest obstacle standing between her and her dream. Yet accepting such generosity felt overwhelming, almost impossible. What if people thought she couldn't achieve it on her own? What if she failed despite his support? I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," Daniel urged gently. "This isn't charity, Dr. Carter. It's gratitude, and maybe a little selfishness. I want to be part of something meaningful again." His sincerity broke through her hesitation. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay, yes." As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Emily felt a spark of hope ignite within her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, her dream didn't seem so far out of reach. Little did she know, this decision would not only transform her life but also inspire Daniel to continue giving back in ways neither of them could have imagined. With Daniel's generous funding secured, Emily threw herself into turning her dream into reality. She named the clinic Harper Carter Community Health Center, a nod to their shared journey and the life-changing connection that made it all possible. But despite the financial backing, building the clinic was far from smooth sailing. It required patience, determination, and an unwavering belief in its purpose. The first hurdle came in the form of bureaucratic red tape. Securing permits for construction proved to be a labyrinthine process, filled with endless paperwork and meetings with city officials who seemed more interested in delaying progress than supporting the project. Emily spent countless hours navigating this maze, often staying up late to research zoning laws or draft appeals. At times, frustration threatened to overwhelm her, but she reminded herself why she was doing this, for the people who had no other options. Daniel remained actively involved, using his influence to help cut through some of the bureaucratic hurdles. He arranged introductions with key decision-makers and even attended meetings to advocate for the clinic. "This isn't just about healthcare," he told one skeptical official. "It's about giving hope to a community that's been forgotten." Once the permits were finally approved, construction began, but new challenges quickly arose. The site chosen for the clinic was in an underserved neighborhood where infrastructure was lacking. Contractors discovered issues with plumbing and electrical systems that required costly repairs before construction could proceed. Emily worried that the delays would drain their budget, but Daniel reassured her. "We'll find a way," he said firmly. "This is too important to give up now." As the physical structure took shape, Emily turned her attention to staffing. Recruiting doctors, nurses, and administrative staff willing to work in an underfunded area wasn't easy. Many professionals expressed interest but ultimately declined, citing concerns about workload or compensation. Undeterred, Emily reached out to medical schools and residency programs, appealing to young doctors eager to make a difference. Slowly, a team began to form, a mix of seasoned practitioners and idealistic newcomers united by a shared mission. One particularly heartwarming addition to the team was Dr. Patel, Emily's former colleague from St. Vincent's Hospital. When he heard about the clinic, he immediately offered to volunteer part-time. "You inspired me to get back to why I became a doctor in the first place," he told her during their first meeting at the construction site. His involvement gave Emily renewed energy. Having someone else share the burden made the weight feel lighter. Despite these challenges, there were moments of triumph that kept everyone motivated. One day, while touring the nearly completed facility, Emily met a local woman named Maria, who lived in the neighborhood. Maria approached her hesitantly, clutching her young daughter's hand. "Is this really going to be a clinic?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "For us." "Yes," Emily replied warmly. "That's exactly what it's for." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "My daughter has asthma, and we can't afford to see a specialist. This will change everything." Moments like these reminded Emily why she'd fought so hard. They fueled her resolve to push through every obstacle, no matter how daunting. Finally, after months of planning, construction, and tireless effort, the Harper Carter Community Health Center opened its doors to the public. On opening day, lines stretched around the block as families poured in for checkups, vaccinations, and consultations. Volunteers handed out flyers advertising free health workshops and mental health services, while local businesses donated supplies to celebrate the occasion. Inside the clinic, Emily moved between exam rooms, greeting patients and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She paused at one point to watch Daniel interacting with a group of children gathered in the waiting area. He was teaching them how to use stethoscopes, his laughter blending with theirs. It struck her then how much Daniel had grown since they'd first met, not just as a philanthropist, but as a person deeply invested in making a difference. By the end of the day, exhaustion settled over Emily like a heavy blanket, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came with fulfillment. As she stood outside the clinic, watching families leave with smiles on their faces, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was more than just a building. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together for a common cause. Later that evening, as she reviewed patient records and planned for future initiatives, Emily reflected on how far she'd come. What started as a simple act of saving a life had blossomed into something extraordinary, a ripple effect of kindness that continued to grow. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its share of challenges, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. Together, she and Daniel, and the entire community, were creating something that would endure long after they were gone. The opening of the Harper Carter Community Health Center marked the beginning of something extraordinary, a movement that went far beyond providing medical care. It became a symbol of hope, resilience, and what can be achieved when people come together for a common cause. The clinic wasn't just changing individual lives. It was transforming an entire community. For Emily, watching the clinic thrive was both humbling and exhilarating. Every day brought new stories of gratitude from patients who had nowhere else to turn. A single mother with diabetes finally received treatment after years of neglecting her condition because she couldn't afford care. A teenager diagnosed with asthma now had access to medication that prevented frequent emergency room visits. These moments reminded Emily why she'd fought so hard and reinforced her belief in the power of compassion. Daniel, too, found renewed purpose in supporting the clinic. His involvement inspired others in his social circle to contribute, creating a domino effect of generosity. Wealthy individuals who once viewed philanthropy as merely writing checks began volunteering at the clinic, witnessing firsthand the difference their contributions could make. One donor even funded a mobile health unit to bring services directly to neighborhoods too far from the main facility. But the ripple effects extended far beyond financial support. Local businesses donated supplies, from fresh produce for patient nutrition workshops to toys for children waiting in the lobby. Schools organized fundraisers, teaching students the importance of giving back. Even small acts of kindness multiplied, neighbors organizing food drives, offering rides to appointments, or simply checking in on one another. One particularly touching outcome was the transformation of Dr. Patel, who had initially volunteered part-time at the clinic. Inspired by Emily and Daniel's dedication, he left his high-paying position at St. Vincent's Hospital to join the clinic full-time. "This is where I belong," he told Emily during a staff meeting. "Here, medicine feels like it should human." Emma, a young girl treated for chronic ear infections at the clinic, later wrote a letter thanking Emily for helping her hear clearly again. "I can listen to my mom's stories now," she wrote, "and I want to be a doctor like you when I grow up." Her words brought tears to Emily's eyes, a reminder that the clinic wasn't just treating illnesses. It was planting seeds of inspiration and possibility. Meanwhile, Daniel's foundation expanded its mission, launching initiatives to address systemic healthcare disparities across the country. He often credited Emily for reigniting his passion for philanthropy. "She showed me that real change starts with listening," he said during a speech at a national conference. "It's not about imposing solutions. It's about meeting people where they are and empowering them to build better futures." As word spread about the clinic's success, media outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on Emily and Daniel's partnership. Interviews, articles, and even a documentary highlighted how one act of kindness, a doctor saving a stranger's life, had sparked a chain reaction of goodwill. People around the world were inspired to take action in their own communities, proving that even small gestures could create lasting change. Yet despite the accolades, Emily remained grounded. She knew the clinic's true measure of success wasn't in headlines or statistics, but in the everyday moments of connection. A hug from a grateful parent, a child's laughter echoing through the halls, or a patient returning months later to share good news about their recovery. On the wall inside the clinic hung a framed quote that had become its guiding philosophy: "Every act of kindness creates ripples we may never see, but they always matter." It served as a daily reminder of how far they'd come, and how much farther they could go if they continued working together. Through it all, Emily and Daniel grew closer, bound not by obligation but by shared values and mutual respect. They weren't just benefactor and beneficiary. They were partners in creating something greater than themselves. Their journey proved that kindness isn't transactional. It's transformative, capable of healing wounds, bridging divides, and forging bonds that endure. And while neither of them could have predicted the magnitude of what they'd built, one thing was certain. The debt of gratitude Daniel owed Emily had been repaid tenfold, not in material wealth, but in the countless lives touched by their collaboration. Because when we choose to lift each other up, we rise together. Years later, Emily stood outside the bustling Harper Carter Community Health Center, watching families enter with smiles on their faces. She thought back to the night she saved Daniel Harper's life and marveled at how interconnected everything had turned out to be. What started as a simple act of duty had blossomed into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of kindness and reciprocity. That evening, Daniel joined her for a visit, reminiscing about their journey together. "You gave me a second chance," he said, gazing at the clinic sign. "And now look what we've built." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It wasn't just me. None of this would have been possible without you, and everyone who believed in the vision." Inside the clinic, a plaque hung on the wall inscribed with a quote: "Every act of kindness creates ripples we may never see, but they always matter." It was a reminder of how far they'd come and the countless lives touched by their collaboration. Later that week, Emily addressed a group of medical students volunteering at the clinic. She shared her philosophy. "We don't do this work for recognition or reward. We do it because it's the right thing to do. But sometimes, the universe reminds us why kindness matters, and gives us a chance to pay it forward." As she spoke, she glanced at Daniel, who stood quietly in the corner, listening with a proud smile. Their partnership had transformed not only their own lives but also the lives of everyone connected to the clinic. Patients, staff, donors, and volunteers. All were part of a growing circle of gratitude that showed no signs of stopping. For Emily, the journey had come full circle. Saving Daniel's life had led her to fulfill her dream of creating a space where healthcare was accessible to all. And Daniel, in turn, had repaid her kindness by helping her build something sustainable and impactful. The story of Emily and Daniel became a beacon of hope, inspiring others to take action in their own communities. It proved that even small acts of compassion, staying late for surgery, offering a helping hand, or believing in someone when no one else does, can spark chain reactions of goodness that ripple outward, changing lives in ways unimaginable. Because when we choose to lift each other up, we rise together.